The dust settled on the auction block like a shroud over Katherine Sullivan's hope as she stood trembling in the blazing New Mexico sun, unable to believe her own father had just exchanged her life for $200 and a horse. It was June 1878 in Las Lunas, New Mexico territory, and the heat shimmered off the dirt roads like waves of betrayal. Katherine was 19 years old, with auburn hair that caught the light like copper wire and green eyes that had gone dull with shock. The man who had purchased her was named Marcus Thornwell, a wealthy rancher from the Northern Territories who needed a wife and had no patience for courtship. Her father, Daniel Sullivan, had gambling debts that stretched from Santa Fe to Albuquerque, and Katherine had become nothing more than a commodity to settle his accounts. "Get in the wagon," Marcus commanded, his voice rough as gravel. He was perhaps 40 years old, with a face weathered by sun and cruelty. Katherine's legs would not obey her mind. She stood frozen on the wooden platform where livestock had been sold just hours before, her simple cotton dress sticking to her back with perspiration that was equal parts heat and terror. "I said get in the wagon." Marcus grabbed her arm with fingers that dug into her flesh hard enough to bruise. Katherine stumbled forward, her vision blurring with tears she refused to shed in public. Her mother had died 2 years ago from consumption, and her younger brother Thomas had been sent to live with an uncle in Colorado. She was alone in the world, except for a father who had just proven he valued cards and whiskey more than his own daughter. The wagon lurched forward, and Katherine gripped the rough wooden seat to keep from falling. Las Lunas disappeared behind them as they headed north on the dusty road, and with it went any remnants of the life she had known. Marcus did not speak to her during the journey, which stretched for hours under the merciless sun. Katherine's thoughts raced in circles like trapped animals. How had her life come to this? Just 3 months ago, she had been teaching at the small schoolhouse in town, helping children learn their letters and numbers. She had been saving money, dreaming of perhaps attending a teacher's college back east. Those dreams now seemed as distant as the mountains on the horizon. They stopped to water the horses at a creek as the sun began its descent toward evening. Katherine climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff and aching. She walked toward the water, desperate for something to drink, when Marcus called out behind her. "Do not think about running. There is nowhere to go out here, and I paid good money for you. I will find you, and when I do, you will regret making the effort." Katherine knelt by the creek and cupped water to her lips with shaking hands. The cold liquid did nothing to wash away the bitter taste of her circumstances. She looked at her reflection in the water and barely recognized the frightened young woman staring back at her. As twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, they arrived at a way station, a rough building that served travelers along the road. Marcus arranged for a room, and Katherine felt her stomach turn with dread at what the night might bring. But when they entered the small room with its single bed and washstand, Marcus simply pointed to a corner. "Sleep there. We have another full day of travel tomorrow." Katherine did not question this small mercy. She curled up on the hard floor, using her shawl as a pillow, and listened to Marcus's snoring fill the room. Sleep came in fits and starts, plagued by nightmares of auction blocks and her father's indifferent face as he pocketed the money Marcus had given him. The next day passed much like the first, with endless miles of desert landscape broken only by the occasional settlement or homestead. Katherine's skin burned despite the bonnet she wore, and her throat felt raw from dust and thirst. Marcus remained largely silent, speaking only to give her orders or warn her again about the futility of escape. They were perhaps an hour from Marcus's ranch when everything changed. 4 riders appeared on the road ahead, their faces covered with bandanas. Bandits were common in the territory, preying on travelers and supply wagons. Marcus cursed and reached for the rifle beside him, but the riders were too fast. Gunshots rang out, and Marcus slumped forward, blood blooming across his chest like a crimson flower. Katherine screamed and grabbed the reins as the horses reared in panic. The wagon tipped, and she was thrown clear, landing hard on the packed earth. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs, and she lay gasping like a fish on dry land. The bandits dismounted, and Katherine knew with terrible certainty that her fate had just traded one nightmare for another. "Well, what do we have here?" one of the men said, pulling down his bandana to reveal a scarred face and yellow teeth. "A pretty little thing traveling with old Marcus." "Was not expecting such a bonus today." Katherine scrambled backward, her hands scraping against rocks and thorns. The men advanced, and she could smell whiskey and violence on them. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Her voice had abandoned her along with everything else. Then another sound cut through the air, the thunder of hooves approaching fast. The bandits turned, and one of them fell from a single rifle shot that echoed across the desert. The others grabbed for their weapons, but two more shots rang out in quick succession, and suddenly there was only one bandit left standing. He ran for his horse and rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving his dead companions behind. Katherine looked up to see a man on horseback silhouetted against the setting sun. He was tall in the saddle, wearing the typical garb of a working cowboy with worn leather chaps, a dusty hat, and a bandana around his neck. He dismounted with fluid grace and approached slowly, his rifle lowered but still in hand. "Are you hurt, miss?" His voice was deep but gentle, a contrast to every other male voice she had heard in the past 2 days. Katherine tried to answer, but the words caught in her throat. She looked at Marcus's body slumped in the wagon, then at the dead bandits on the ground, and suddenly everything that had happened over the past 48 hours crashed over her like a wave. The sobs came from somewhere deep in her chest, raw and painful. The cowboy holstered his rifle and knelt beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "You are safe now. My name is Gideon Walsh. I have a ranch about 5 miles west of here. Let me help you." Katherine wanted to tell him everything, wanted to explain that she was not Marcus's wife, that her own father had sold her like cattle, that she had nowhere to go and no one in the world who cared if she lived or died. But all that came out was more sobbing, great gulping breaths that made her whole body shake. Gideon hesitated for just a moment, then moved closer and wrapped his arms around her shoulders. The gesture was so unexpected, so genuinely compassionate, that Katherine found herself leaning into him, her face pressed against his dusty shirt. He smelled like leather and sage and horses, clean scents that spoke of honest work under open skies. "It is all right," he said softly. "Whatever happened, you are safe now. I promise you that." Katherine could not remember the last time someone had held her with such kindness. Not since her mother's death had anyone touched her with gentleness rather than greed or violence. She cried until her tears soaked through his shirt, until her throat was raw and her eyes burned. Through it all, Gideon simply held her, one hand rubbing small circles on her back, murmuring reassurances that gradually penetrated the fog of her despair. When the storm of tears finally passed, Katherine pulled back, mortified by her loss of control. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I did not mean to." "You have nothing to apologize for," Gideon said firmly. He had kind eyes, she noticed, a warm brown that reminded her of the earth after rain. His face was tanned and weathered but not cruel, probably in his mid-20s with the solid build of someone who made his living through physical labor. "Can you tell me what happened here?" "Was that man your husband?" The question made Catherine's stomach turn. "No, he bought me 2 days ago in Las Lunas. My father sold me to him to pay gambling debts." The words came out flat and emotionless, as though she were reciting facts about someone else's life. Gideon's jaw tightened, and something flashed in his eyes that might have been anger, though Catherine sensed it was not directed at her. "That is not legal. A person cannot be sold like property, not anymore and not ever in this way." "Legal or not, it happened," Catherine said bitterly. "Marcus paid $200 for me, and my father took the money without a second thought. I was to be Marcus's wife, whether I willed it or not." "And now Marcus is dead," Gideon said, glancing at the wagon, "which means you are free. You owe nothing to anyone." The concept of freedom seemed as foreign to Catherine as the surface of the moon. "I have nowhere to go, no money, no family who wants me. I was a teacher in Las Lunas before my father." She could not finish the sentence. Gideon stood and offered her his hand. "First things first. We cannot stay here with these bodies. I need to report this to the law in the nearest town, and you need food, water, and a safe place to rest. My ranch has both a main house where I live and a smaller cabin that my foreman used to occupy before he moved on. You could stay there while we figure out what comes next." Catherine looked at his outstretched hand, weathered and calloused from hard work. She had no reason to trust this stranger, no reason to believe his intentions were pure. But she also had no alternatives, and something in his steady gaze made her want to take the risk. She placed her hand in his and let him help her to her feet. Her legs were unsteady, and Gideon kept his hand on her elbow until she found her balance. "We should take your horse and what supplies Marcus had. There is no sense letting them go to waste," Gideon said practically. He moved to the wagon and rifled through the contents, pulling out a carpet bag that Catherine recognized as containing her few possessions. "Is this yours?" She nodded, touched that he thought to look for her belongings. Gideon also retrieved a canteen of water and handed it to her. Catherine drank deeply, the water soothing her parched throat. Within 20 minutes, Gideon had secured Marcus's horse to his own and helped Catherine mount behind him on his sturdy bay gelding. She had ridden before, though not in quite some time, and she found herself pressed against Gideon's back, her arms wrapped around his waist to keep from falling. It was an intimate position that would have scandalized the ladies back in Las Lunas, but Catherine was too exhausted to care about propriety. They rode as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, countless points of light that seemed close enough to touch in the clear desert air. Gideon maintained an easy pace that did not jar Catherine too much, and he occasionally asked if she needed to stop and rest. His consideration was so different from Marcus's callous treatment that Catherine found herself relaxing slightly, despite everything that had happened. "How did you come to be on that road at just the right moment?" Catherine asked after they had ridden in silence for a while. "I was returning from Santa Fe where I sold some horses," Gideon explained. "I usually take a different route, but I heard there had been reports of bandits on the main road and thought I should check it out. I did not expect to find what I did." He paused. "I am sorry I did not arrive sooner. Before that man Marcus could buy you." "You could not have known," Catherine said, "and you saved my life today. Those bandits would have." She did not finish the thought, "But they did not," Gideon said firmly, "and they will not. I give you my word on that." They arrived at Gideon's ranch as the moon rose full and bright over the landscape. The ranch was modest but well maintained, with a main house built of adobe and wood, a barn, several corrals, and the smaller cabin Gideon had mentioned. Even in the moonlight, Catherine could see evidence of careful attention in the neat fences and organized layout. Gideon dismounted first, then helped Catherine down. Her legs nearly buckled after the long ride, and he caught her easily. "The cabin is just over here," he said, guiding her toward the small structure. Inside, he lit a lantern that revealed a single room with a bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a wood stove, and a few shelves. It was simple but clean, and to Katherine, it looked like paradise compared to the floor of that way station. "I know it is not much," Gideon said, sounding almost apologetic, "but the bed has clean linens, and I will bring you some food and fresh water. There is a pump outside for washing up." "It is perfect," Katherine said, and she meant it. "Thank you, Gideon. I do not know how I can ever repay your kindness." Gideon looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You do not owe me anything. I did what any decent person would do. Now let me get you that food." He returned a short time later with a plate of cold chicken, bread, cheese, and an apple, along with a pitcher of cool water. Katherine realized she had not eaten anything substantial since before the auction, and she devoured the meal while Gideon discreetly turned his attention to building a fire in the stove. "It gets cold at night out here, even in summer," he explained. "This will keep you comfortable. I will be in the main house if you need anything. Just knock on the door and do not worry about waking me. I am a light sleeper." After he left, Katherine washed her face and hands at the pump outside, then returned to the cabin. She changed into her nightdress, one of the few items in her carpet bag, and climbed into the bed. The mattress was more comfortable than anything she had experienced in days, and the sheets smelled like sunshine and fresh air. But despite her exhaustion, sleep did not come easily. Katherine lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the horses moving in the corral, the call of a night bird, the whisper of wind through the desert plants. Her mind kept returning to the events of the past days, replaying them like a series of horrible photographs. Her father's face when he agreed to Marcus's offer, showing no emotion beyond relief that his debts would be paid. The humiliation of standing on that auction block while men examined her like livestock. Marcus's cruel grip on her arm, the bandits advancing with terrible intentions. And then Gideon, appearing like something out of a storybook, risking his own life to save hers. Why had he done it? Men did not simply help women without expecting something in return, not in Katherine's experience. Yet Gideon had asked nothing of her, had treated her with unfailing courtesy and respect. It was so unexpected that Katherine did not quite know how to process it. She finally drifted into an uneasy sleep as the moon crossed the sky, only to be awakened by nightmares of hands grabbing her, pulling her toward the auction block again and again. She woke with a gasp, her heart pounding, and lay staring at the cabin ceiling as dawn light began to seep through the window. A soft knock on the door made her jump. "Miss Sullivan, I brought some breakfast if you are awake." Katherine wrapped a shawl around her nightdress and opened the door to find Gideon holding a tray with eggs, bacon, and coffee. He kept his eyes politely averted from her state of undress. "I thought you might be hungry," he said. "I also brought some clothes that belonged to my sister. She left them here when she married and moved to California. They might fit you better than that dress for getting around the ranch." Katherine took the tray, noting the worn but clean work shirt and split riding skirt folded beside the food. "You have a sister." "2 sisters and a brother, all older than me. They have all moved on to their own lives. The ranch was my father's, but he died 3 years ago and my mother followed him within the year. So now it is just me." He said this matter-of-factly, but Katherine heard the loneliness underneath the words. "I am sorry for your losses," she said softly. "And I am sorry for yours," Gideon replied. "I plan to ride into the nearest town today to report what happened yesterday. I will tell the law that Marcus Thornwell is dead, killed by bandits, and that his widow escaped. It will be simpler that way." "But I was not his widow," Katherine protested. "As far as anyone in town knows, you were traveling with your husband when bandits attacked. That story will cause you far less trouble than the truth," Gideon said gently. "The law does not need to know about the auction or your father's debts. Those details would only complicate matters and potentially cause you shame you do not deserve." Katherine saw the wisdom in his words. "What will I tell people about where I am staying? You are a widow in need of temporary shelter while you recover from the trauma of losing your husband. It is perfectly respectable for you to stay in the cabin while making plans for your future. My reputation is good in these parts, and no one will question it," Gideon explained. After he left, Katherine ate the excellent breakfast and then changed into the clothes he had brought. The shirt was soft from many washings, and the riding skirt fit reasonably well, though she had to adjust the waist with a belt. She pulled her hair back into a practical braid and ventured outside to explore her new surroundings in the morning light. The ranch spread across a small valley with dramatic rock formations rising in the distance. Gideon had perhaps 24 horses in various corrals, beautiful animals that moved with grace and spirit. Katherine walked to the nearest fence and watched them, finding something soothing in their peaceful grazing. "You like horses?" Gideon's voice came from behind her, and she turned to see him approaching with a saddle slung over one shoulder. "I do, though I have not ridden much in recent years," Katherine admitted. "We could not afford to keep horses after my mother died and my father's gambling worsened." Gideon set down the saddle and leaned against the fence beside her. "These are mostly Mustangs I have broken and trained to sell. I catch them wild and gentle them until they are good for riding or ranch work. It is honest work and I enjoy it." "They are beautiful," Katherine said, watching a particularly striking paint mare toss her head. "That one is Luna," Gideon said, following her gaze. "She is not for sale. I kept her as my own after I trained her. She has spirit, but also loyalty. Reminds me that wild things can choose to trust without losing what makes them special." Katherine wondered if he was speaking only about horses or if there was a deeper meaning to his words. Before she could ask, Gideon straightened and picked up the saddle again. "I should head to town. I will be back by evening. There is food in the main house if you get hungry, and please feel free to explore the ranch. You are not a prisoner here, Katherine. You can leave any time you wish, though I hope you will stay at least until you have somewhere safe to go." Katherine watched him ride away on his bay gelding, leading Marcus's horse behind him. The ranch felt very quiet after he left, just her and the horses and the vast New Mexico sky. She spent the morning cleaning the cabin more thoroughly, finding comfort in the familiar domestic tasks. Then she ventured into the main house, feeling somewhat intrusive but also curious about the man who had saved her. The house was tidy but clearly the home of someone living alone. Dishes were washed and stacked neatly, but there were no curtains on the windows, no decorative touches that a woman might add. Katherine found herself wondering about Gideon's sisters and whether they had helped raise him after their mother died. She wondered why a man his age, decent and hardworking, had not yet married. She prepared a simple lunch from the supplies in the kitchen and ate at the table, then washed and dried the dishes. The afternoon stretched long, and Katherine found herself waiting for Gideon's return with an anticipation that surprised her. She barely knew this man, yet his presence made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since her mother's death. Gideon returned as the sun was setting, and Katherine met him outside to help with the horses. He looked tired but not displeased with his day in town. "The law accepted my report without much question," he said as they unsaddled the horses and brushed them down. Marcus Thornwell had a reputation as a hard man, and they were not surprised he had been killed by bandits. They will send word to his ranch in the Northern Territories. As for you, I registered you at the land office as Katherine Thornwell, widow, staying temporarily on my property. It gives you legal identity and protection. Katherine Thornwell, she repeated, the false name feeling strange on her tongue. I suppose Katherine Sullivan is gone now. You can reclaim your real name whenever you wish, Gideon said. But for now, this protects you from any claim your father or Marcus's associates might try to make. A widow has more rights than an unmarried woman in your situation. They walked to the main house, and Katherine was surprised when Gideon invited her to join him for dinner. I am not much of a cook, but I can make a decent stew. It seems foolish for us to eat separately when we are both here. Katherine helped him prepare the meal, falling into an easy rhythm of chopping vegetables while Gideon tended the meat. They talked about simple things, the ranch, the horses, the weather. Gideon told her stories about growing up with his siblings, the pranks they played, and the lessons their father taught them about ranching. Katherine found herself laughing for the first time in what felt like years, the sound rusty from disuse. "What about you?" Gideon asked as they sat down to eat. "What was it like being a teacher?" Katherine's expression softened with memory. "I loved it. The children were so eager to learn, even the difficult ones. There is something magical about seeing a child's face light up when they finally understand a concept they have been struggling with. I wanted to make a difference in their lives, help them have opportunities I never did." "You speak of it in the past tense," Gideon observed gently. "I do not think I can go back to Las Lunas," Katherine said, her voice dropping. "Too many people know what my father did, the shame of it." She paused. "And I am not sure I could forgive this territory for allowing such things to happen." "Not all places are like Las Lunas," Gideon said. "And you are still a teacher, Katherine. One bad auction does not change who you are or what you can offer the world." His words touched something deep inside her, a part that had been wounded but not destroyed by her father's betrayal. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. Not just for saving my life, but for treating me like a person with value when everyone else treated me as a commodity." "You do have value," Gideon said, his brown eyes meeting hers across the table. "More than you know, and anyone who cannot see that is a fool." The days that followed settled into a comfortable pattern. Katherine helped around the ranch, discovering that she enjoyed the physical work of caring for animals and maintaining the property. Gideon taught her more about horses, showing her how to read their body language and earn their trust. In the evenings, they shared meals and conversation, gradually revealing more about themselves to each other. Katherine learned that Gideon had inherited the ranch at 22 and had spent the past 3 years building it into something profitable through sheer determination and hard work. He was honest almost to a fault, known throughout the territory for fair dealing and his skill with horses. He had been in love once, he admitted one evening, with a girl from Santa Fe, but she had wanted city life and parties, things he could not provide on a remote ranch. "I think we both realized we wanted different things from life," Gideon said without bitterness. "She married a banker and seems happy. I hold no grudge." Katherine shared her own story more slowly, the words sometimes catching in her throat as she described her mother's death and watching her father sink deeper into gambling and drink. She spoke of her brother Thomas, whom she had not seen or heard from in over a year, and her worry that he might have forgotten her entirely. "Family is not just about blood," Gideon said thoughtfully. "It is about who shows up for you when life gets hard. Your father and brother may share your blood, but they were not family to you when you needed them. Sometimes we have to build our own families from the people we choose and who choose us back." These words resonated with Katherine, planting a seed of possibility she had not considered before. What if she could build a new life here, not as Katherine Sullivan with her shameful past, but as someone new? Not Katherine Thornwell, the false widow, but simply Katherine, a woman defining herself on her own terms. 3 weeks after her arrival at the ranch, Katherine was working in the garden she had started behind the main house when a rider approached. She tensed, old fears rising, but Gideon emerged from the barn and greeted the visitor warmly. "Sheriff Martinez, what brings you out this way?" The sheriff was a middle-aged man with silver threading through his dark hair and a weathered face that suggested he had seen much in his years of keeping the peace. He dismounted and shook Gideon's hand before his eyes traveled to Katherine. "Walsh, I need to speak with you about the Marcus Thornwell situation," the sheriff said, "and with the widow if she is available." Katherine's heart began to pound, but Gideon gave her a reassuring look. "Of course. Katherine, would you join us?" They sat on the porch of the main house, and the sheriff removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "Mrs. Thornwell, I am sorry for your loss, but I have to ask you some questions about what happened that day on the road." Katherine kept her voice steady as she recounted the story Gideon had constructed. The bandits attacking without warning, her husband dying quickly, and then Gideon arriving to save her. The sheriff listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "And you never saw the faces of the bandits who survived?" he pressed. "Only one man, the one who escaped. He had a scar across his cheek," Katherine said, remembering the yellow-toothed man who had leered at her. The sheriff nodded. "That would be Jake Mercer. He and his gang have been causing trouble throughout the territory. We have been trying to catch them for months." He turned to Gideon. "You did us a favor taking out 3 of them, Walsh. The territory is safer for it." After the sheriff left, Katherine felt shaky with relief. He believed us. The truth would have been more complicated and would not have changed anything about what happened, Gideon said. Sometimes a simple story is better than a complex truth, especially when the truth involves crimes that cannot be prosecuted because the perpetrators are dead or gone. As summer deepened into July and August, Katherine found herself thinking less about her past and more about her present. She woke each morning eager to start the day, to work alongside Gideon with the horses or in the garden, to sit on the porch in the evening and watch the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and pink. She also found herself noticing things about Gideon that had nothing to do with gratitude or respect. The way his shirt stretched across his shoulders when he lifted hay bales. The rare smile that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. The gentleness of his hands despite their strength, whether he was handling a skittish horse or passing her a cup of coffee. One evening in late August, they were sitting on the porch after dinner when Gideon suddenly spoke. "Katherine, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." Her heart quickened. "What is it? Are you happy here? On the ranch, I mean, because if you want to leave to go somewhere else and start over, I will help you. I have some money saved, enough to get you to California or back east if that is what you want. You do not owe me anything, and I do not want you to feel trapped here the way you were trapped by Marcus." Katherine was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "The truth is, I have not felt trapped since the day you brought me here. This is the first time in years I have felt truly free. I wake up each morning and choose to be here, choose to work on this ranch, choose to sit here with you in the evening. That choice makes all the difference." "So you want to stay?" Gideon's voice held something that might have been hope. "I want to stay," Katherine confirmed. "If you will have me. I know I cannot live in that cabin forever without people starting to talk, but perhaps I could stay on as your housekeeper or cook. Make it official employment so there is no question of impropriety." Gideon was silent for so long that Katherine began to worry she had said something wrong. Then he turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the lamplight spilling from the house. "I do not want you to stay as my housekeeper, Katherine." Her heart sank. "Oh, I see. I am sorry. I should not have presumed." "Let me finish," Gideon said gently. "I do not want you as my housekeeper because that is not how I think of you. These past months, having you here, talking with you, working alongside you, it has made me realize how empty this ranch was before. How empty I was, if I am honest. You have brought life back to this place, to me, and I have come to care for you deeply. More than I probably should, given how we met and what you have been through." Katherine could hardly breathe. "Gideon, I am not asking you for anything," he continued quickly. "You have had too many men take from you, demand from you. I just need you to know that you are welcome here for as long as you want, not as an employee but as someone I value beyond measure. Someone I have come to love, though I know it may be too soon for me to say such things." "It is not too soon," Katherine whispered, her eyes filling with tears. But these were different from the tears she had cried that first day. These were tears of relief, of joy, of finally finding something real after so much loss. "I have been afraid to admit even to myself how I feel about you. After everything that happened, I was not sure I could trust my own feelings or trust any man again. But you have been nothing but good and kind and patient. You make me feel safe, Gideon. You make me feel valued. You make me feel loved in a way I never have before." Gideon reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against hers. "You are priceless to me, Katherine. Always. Not because of what you can do or provide, but because of who you are. Your kindness despite what you have suffered. Your strength in rebuilding your life. Your laughter and your tears and everything in between. You are the most valuable thing in my world." Katherine squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They sat together on the porch as the night deepened around them, hands clasped, the darkness alive with cricket song and the sound of horses moving in the corral. It felt like a beginning, the first chapter of a story she was finally allowed to write for herself. In September, Gideon traveled to Santa Fe and returned with a proper engagement ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had belonged to his grandmother. He proposed formally on one knee in the garden Katherine had nurtured, among the tomatoes and squash that flourished under her care. "Katherine Sullivan, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because society demands it or because you need protection, but because I love you and want to build a life with you as partners in all things." "Yes," Katherine said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married in October in a small church in Las Lunas, with Sheriff Martinez and his wife serving as witnesses. Katherine wore a cream-colored dress that Gideon's eldest sister sent from California, and Gideon wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed for once. The priest who performed the ceremony had kind eyes and did not ask difficult questions about their courtship or Katherine's past. After the ceremony, they rode back to the ranch together, Katherine seated in front of Gideon on Luna, the paint mare she had admired that first morning. The ranch looked beautiful in the autumn light, the adobe walls golden, the mountains purple in the distance. "Welcome home, Mrs. Walsh," Gideon murmured against her hair. "I have been home for months," Katherine replied. "This is just making it official." Their wedding night was gentle and sweet, two people learning to trust in the language of touch and intimacy. Gideon was patient and careful, always checking that Katherine was comfortable, that she wanted to continue. The tenderness he showed her went a long way toward healing wounds Katherine had not even known she carried. Winter came to New Mexico territory, bringing cold nights and occasional snow that dusted the desert like sugar on cake. Katherine and Gideon spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other from books or simply talking about their plans for the ranch. They wanted to expand the horse breeding operation, perhaps add some cattle. Katherine talked about starting a small school on the ranch, teaching the children of the few families scattered throughout the valley. "You have always been a teacher at heart," Gideon said, watching her face light up as she described her plans. "I will help you build a schoolhouse if that is what you want." In January, Katherine received a letter that had been forwarded from Las Lunas. It was from her brother Thomas, now 16 years old and working on their uncle's ranch in Colorado. The letter was brief and somewhat stilted, but Thomas wanted to know if Katherine was safe, if she had forgiven their father, if she might write back to him. Katherine read the letter 3 times, emotions warring inside her. Finally, she sat down and wrote a response. She told Thomas she was married now to a good man, living on a ranch in New Mexico territory. She told him she was safe and, more importantly, happy. As for their father, she wrote honestly, "I cannot yet forgive him for what he did, but I am working toward letting go of the anger I carried. It was poisoning me, and I have too much good in my life now to let that poison continue its work. Perhaps one day I will be able to forgive, but that day is not today, and that is all right." She invited Thomas to visit when he was older if he wished. Family was important, she wrote, but family had to be built on respect and love, not just shared blood. She hoped they could build that kind of relationship now that they were both becoming adults. Gideon mailed the letter for her on his next trip to town, and Katherine felt lighter for having written it. She was learning that healing was not a straight line but a winding path with setbacks and breakthroughs in equal measure. Spring brought new life to the ranch. Gideon had bred several of his best mares, and foals arrived with long legs and big eyes, tottering around the corrals while their mothers watched protectively. Katherine loved watching the babies, their joy in simply being alive infectious. She also began to suspect that new life was growing inside her as well. Her monthly courses had not come in 2 months, and she felt a constant low-grade nausea that intensified around food smells. She waited another month to be certain before telling Gideon, wanting to be sure before raising his hopes. One evening in May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Katherine finally spoke. "Gideon, I have something to tell you. I am with child. The baby should come in late autumn." Gideon's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, joy, concern, and then joy again winning out. "A baby, we are going to have a baby." "Yes," Katherine said, laughing at his reaction. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Gideon said, pulling her into his arms carefully as though she had suddenly become fragile. "This is the best news I could have imagined. A child, our child." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. Katherine continued to work on the ranch, though Gideon watched her like a hawk and tried to prevent her from lifting anything heavier than a teacup. She reassured him that she was healthy and strong, that women had been having babies while continuing their normal activities since the beginning of time. Still, his protectiveness was endearing rather than stifling. He built a rocking chair for the nursery they were preparing in the main house. He traded one of his best horses for an intricately carved wooden cradle that a craftsman in Santa Fe had made. He consulted with Sheriff Martinez's wife, who had raised 6 children, about everything from pregnancy nutrition to what supplies they would need. In August, Katherine started the school she had dreamed of, teaching 5 children from neighboring ranches in a corner of the barn that Gideon had converted into a makeshift classroom. She loved being a teacher again, loved seeing young minds expand with new knowledge. The work exhausted her more than it once had, her growing belly making movement awkward, but she pushed through the tiredness, energized by the children's enthusiasm. One afternoon in early November, as Katherine was reading to her students, she felt the first contraction. It was not terribly painful, just a tightening across her abdomen, but she knew immediately what it meant. She calmly finished the lesson, sent the children home, and walked to the barn where Gideon was working with a particularly stubborn yearling. "Gideon, I think the baby is coming." Gideon nearly dropped the lead rope he was holding. "Now, right now, probably not right this instant, but sometime in the next day or so, I would imagine," Katherine said, trying to sound calmer than she felt. This was her first child, and despite all the preparation, the reality of labor was daunting. Gideon immediately swung into action. He had already arranged for Mrs. Martinez to attend the birth, and he sent one of the ranch hands racing to town to fetch her. He helped Katherine into the house, settling her in their bedroom, bringing her water and extra pillows, generally fussing over her in a way that was both helpful and endearingly nervous. Mrs. Martinez arrived 2 hours later, a capable woman with graying hair and steady hands. She examined Katherine and pronounced that things were progressing normally, but that it would likely be many hours before the baby arrived. "First babies take their time," she said calmly. "No reason to panic. Everything looks good." The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. Katherine had thought she understood pain, but nothing had prepared her for the relentless waves of contractions that seemed to consume her entire body. Gideon stayed by her side the entire time, despite Mrs. Martinez's suggestion that he might want to wait elsewhere. "I am not leaving her," he said firmly, holding Katherine's hand through each contraction, letting her squeeze hard enough to leave marks. "You are doing beautifully," he murmured during a brief respite. "You are the strongest person I have ever known." "I do not feel strong," Katherine gasped. "I feel like I am being torn apart." "You are bringing life into the world," Gideon said, wiping her face with a cool cloth. "There is nothing stronger than that." As afternoon faded into evening, Mrs. Martinez finally declared it was time to push. Katherine summoned reserves of strength she did not know she possessed, bearing down when instructed, breathing when told to breathe. The pain was overwhelming, but so was the sense of purpose driving her forward. And then, as the last light faded from the sky outside their window, a new sound filled the room, the thin, warbling cry of a newborn baby. "A boy," Mrs. Martinez announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A healthy baby boy." Katherine burst into tears of exhaustion and joy as Mrs. Martinez placed the baby on her chest. He was red-faced and covered in vernix, tiny and perfect and absolutely miraculous. Gideon was crying too, she realized, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son. "He is beautiful," Gideon whispered, touching the baby's small hand with one finger. The infant immediately grasped it, his grip surprisingly strong. "What should we name him?" Katherine asked, gazing down at the baby who was already rooting toward her breast, instinct guiding him even in his first minutes of life. "I was thinking maybe Matthew," Gideon suggested. "It means gift from God, and that is what he is, what you both are, the greatest gifts I could have received." "Matthew Walsh," Katherine repeated. "I love it. Hello, Matthew. Welcome to the world, little one." The weeks after Matthew's birth were exhausting in ways Katherine had not anticipated. The baby needed to eat every few hours, day and night, and Katherine felt like she was perpetually tired despite Gideon's best efforts to help. But even through the exhaustion, she felt a bone-deep contentment that made every sleepless night worthwhile. Gideon proved to be a natural father, walking Matthew around the house at all hours, talking to him about horses and ranching even though the baby could not possibly understand. He changed diapers without complaint and brought Katherine food and water while she nursed, making sure she was taking care of herself while she took care of their son. "You are wonderful with him," Katherine said one night, watching Gideon rock Matthew back to sleep after a feeding. "He is wonderful, period," Gideon replied, gazing down at the baby with such love that Katherine felt her heart might burst. "I still cannot believe he is ours, that we made this perfect little person." Winter passed into spring and then summer again, Matthew growing from a tiny newborn into a chubby, smiling infant who laughed at everything his father did. Katherine reopened her school once Matthew was old enough to nap in a basket beside her while she taught. Life on the ranch was busy but good, filled with purpose and love. On a warm evening in August, almost exactly 2 years after Katherine had first arrived at the ranch, they sat on the porch together watching Matthew toddle around the yard, his steps still unsteady but determined. He had Gideon's brown eyes and Katherine's auburn hair, and his personality was already distinct, curious and bold and affectionate. "You ever think about that day on the road?" Gideon asked quietly. When everything changed, Katherine considered the question. "Sometimes. It is hard to believe that terrible day led to this beautiful life. If Marcus had not bought me, if the bandits had not attacked, if you had not come along exactly when you did, none of this would exist. Matthew would not exist." "I think about it too," Gideon admitted. "I think about how easily I could have taken the other road that day, how close I came to never meeting you. It terrifies me sometimes, how much our lives depend on chance and timing." "Or maybe it was not chance," Katherine suggested. "Maybe we were meant to find each other, and the universe just had a particularly dramatic way of bringing us together." Gideon smiled and pulled her close. "I like that idea better, destiny instead of chance." "Whatever it was, I am grateful," Katherine said. "Grateful for you, for Matthew, for this life we have built. I never imagined I could be this happy after what happened. There were days I did not think I would survive, and now I have everything I never knew I wanted." Matthew stumbled and fell, then immediately picked himself up and continued his exploration, unfazed by the minor setback. Katherine and Gideon both laughed at his resilience. "He has your strength," Gideon observed. "And your stubbornness," Katherine countered. "A dangerous combination." As the sun set over the New Mexico desert, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Katherine felt at peace in a way she had once thought impossible. The scars from her past were still there. She sometimes had nightmares about the auction or the bandits, and she had never reconciled with her father, but those scars no longer defined her. She was Katherine Walsh now, wife and mother and teacher, a woman who had survived terrible things and come out stronger on the other side. She was loved wholly and completely by a man who saw her true value. She had a son who filled her days with joy and purpose. She had a home that was truly hers, built on trust and respect rather than ownership or control. The years continued to roll forward with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Matthew grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved horses as much as his father did. Katherine's school expanded, eventually moving from the barn into a proper schoolhouse that Gideon and some neighbors built together. She taught reading and arithmetic, history and geography, helping children throughout the valley access education they might not otherwise receive. When Matthew was 3, Katherine gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Sarah. The labor was faster than with Matthew, though having 2 babies to care for presented its own challenges. Gideon rose to the occasion, often wearing both girls in slings on his chest while he worked around the ranch, talking to them about everything he was doing. They are too young to understand, Katherine pointed out, laughing at the sight of her husband explaining the finer points of fence repair to two infants. It is never too early to start their education, Gideon replied seriously, though his eyes were twinkling. Besides, I like talking to them. They are excellent listeners. The ranch prospered under Gideon's management. His reputation for breeding quality horses spread throughout the territory, and buyers came from as far as Texas and Colorado to purchase his stock. Katherine managed the financial side of the business, her education making her adept with numbers and contracts. They were equal partners in every sense, each bringing their own strengths to their shared enterprise. When Matthew was 7 and the twins were 4, Katherine's brother Thomas finally came to visit. He was now 21, a tall young man who looked so much like their mother that Katherine gasped when she first saw him. The resemblance was bittersweet, a reminder of all they had lost but also all they had survived. Thomas stayed for 2 weeks, helping around the ranch and getting to know his nieces and nephew. He and Katherine talked for hours, filling in the years they had missed. Thomas admitted that he had been angry at her for a long time after she was sold, feeling abandoned even though he knew logically that it was not her fault. "I was just a kid, and I did not understand everything that happened," Thomas said. "I blamed you for leaving, blamed our father for selling you, blamed the whole world for being so unfair. But I am old enough now to understand that you were as much a victim as I was. More so, actually. I never wanted to leave you," Katherine said, tears in her eyes. "I thought about you constantly, worried about whether you were safe and happy. I am so glad you are here now that we can rebuild our relationship." "You have a good life here," Thomas observed. "A good husband, beautiful children. You landed on your feet despite everything." "I did," Katherine agreed. "Though it took work and healing and the love of a good man who saw my worth when I could not see it myself. I was lucky, Thomas. Not everyone in my situation would have been as fortunate." Before Thomas left to return to Colorado, he sought out Gideon and shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for taking care of my sister, for giving her the family and home she deserved. I cannot change what our father did, but it makes me feel better knowing she ended up with someone who truly values her." "She is the most valuable thing in my world," Gideon replied simply. "Always has been, always will be." The children grew, as children do, with Matthew becoming a skilled horseman who helped his father with the training. Emma and Sarah developed distinct personalities despite being twins. Emma was quiet and thoughtful, preferring books to physical activity, while Sarah was boisterous and adventurous, always climbing trees or racing her brother. Katherine loved them all fiercely, these children who had made her a mother and completed the family she had built from the ashes of the one that betrayed her. When Matthew was 12, a stranger came to the ranch. He was an older man, weathered and stooped, with rheumy eyes and a trembling hand. Katherine did not recognize him at first. Then with a jolt of shock, she realized it was her father. Daniel Sullivan looked decades older than the last time she had seen him. The gambling and drinking had taken their toll, leaving him a shell of the man he once was. He stood in the yard, hat in hand, looking up at Katherine on the porch with an expression that might have been shame or regret. "Katie," he said, using the childhood nickname she had not heard in years. "I came to see if you might spare an old man some food and perhaps a place to sleep for the night." Katherine felt a storm of emotions: anger, hurt, confusion. This man had sold her like livestock, had valued his gambling debts more than his own daughter. Part of her wanted to send him away, to let him experience the same abandonment he had shown her. But another part of her, the part that had been healed by love and time, felt only pity. He was clearly destitute, with nowhere else to turn. And Katherine had learned that holding on to anger only hurt the person carrying it. Gideon came out of the barn and immediately moved to Katherine's side, sensing her distress. When she explained who the visitor was, his jaw tightened. "You want him to leave? Say the word, and I will escort him off our property," Gideon said quietly. Katherine looked at her father, really looked at him. He was broken, defeated, a shadow of the man who had raised her before grief and addiction consumed him. She thought about the person she had become, the woman who taught children about compassion and second chances. "No," she said finally. "He can stay for dinner and the night. In the morning we will talk." They fed Daniel Sullivan at their table, though the meal was strained and awkward. Matthew and the twins stared at this grandfather they had never known, sensing the tension even if they did not understand its source. After the children were in bed, Katherine finally confronted her father in the room they had prepared for him. "Why did you come here?" she asked bluntly. "Because I am dying," Daniel said, his voice rough. "The doctor in Albuquerque says I have maybe 6 months left, probably less. Liver is failing, and I did not want to die without telling you how sorry I am for what I did to you, Katie. It has haunted me every day since." "Sorry does not change what happened," Katherine said, her voice hard despite the tears threatening to fall. "Sorry does not give me back the days I spent thinking I had no value beyond what someone would pay for me. Sorry does not erase the terror of being sold to a stranger or nearly being killed by bandits." "I know," Daniel said, tears running down his weathered cheeks. "I know I do not deserve your forgiveness. I was a coward and a drunk, and I destroyed our family. Your mother would have been ashamed of me. I am ashamed of myself. But I needed you to know that even though I did terrible things, I never stopped being your father, never stopped loving you even though I lost sight of how to show it." Katherine stood silent for a long moment, wrestling with herself. Finally, she spoke. "I cannot forgive you tonight. Maybe I will never be able to fully forgive you, but I do not hate you either. I have too much good in my life now to waste energy on hate. You can stay here for as long as you need, until the end comes. We will make sure you are comfortable and cared for, not because you deserve it, but because that is the kind of person I choose to be." Daniel nodded, overcome with emotion. "Thank you, Katie. That is more than I had any right to hope for." Her father lived for 4 more months, spending his final days in the room they had given him. Katherine tended to him as his health deteriorated, though she could not bring herself to have deep conversations with him. Some wounds were too deep to heal completely, even with time and goodwill. But she was there when he died on a cold January morning, holding his hand as he took his last breaths. Whatever else he had been, he was still her father, and she owed him that final act of mercy. After Daniel's death, Katherine felt a sense of release, as though a weight she had been carrying for years had finally been lifted. She had done the right thing by caring for him at the end, but she also felt free of him now, free to move forward without the shadow of his betrayal hanging over her. "Are you all right?" Gideon asked her after the simple funeral they held on the ranch. "I am," Katherine said, and she meant it. "I do not regret caring for him, but I am also relieved that chapter is finally closed. Does that make me a terrible person?" "It makes you human," Gideon said, pulling her into his arms. "You showed him more grace than he showed you. That takes strength and compassion. I am proud of you." The years continued their march forward. Matthew grew into a young man and eventually married a girl from a neighboring ranch. He built a house on the property with Gideon's help, choosing to stay and help run the family business rather than strike out on his own. Emma followed her mother's path into teaching, eventually taking over Katherine's school when Katherine decided it was time to step back. Sarah surprised everyone by becoming interested in law, traveling to San Francisco to pursue education that would allow her to fight for justice for people who needed protection. "She gets that from you," Gideon told Katherine. "That fire to protect people who cannot protect themselves." Katherine and Gideon aged together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. Their hair grayed and their joints grew stiff, but they still sat together on the porch most evenings, watching the sunset and talking about their day. They had become fixtures in the community, respected for their fairness and generosity. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Gideon gave Katherine a gift, a leather-bound journal filled with his memories of their life together, written in his careful hand. Katherine read it through tears, seeing their story through his eyes, all the moments he had treasured over the years. "You told me once that I was priceless to you," she said when she finished reading. "But Gideon, you are priceless to me too. You saved my life that day on the road, but more than that, you gave me back my sense of worth. You loved me when I could not love myself. You built a life with me where I was always a partner, never property. I could not have asked for a better husband or a better life." "We built it together," Gideon corrected gently. "Every decision, every challenge, every joy, together, that is what has made it work." As they grew older, grandchildren arrived. Matthew and his wife had 3 sons who reminded Katherine of Matthew at that age, energetic and curious and constantly underfoot. Emma married a teacher she met in Santa Fe and had twin boys, continuing the family tradition of multiples. Sarah remained unmarried, focused on her career, though she returned home often and doted on her nieces and nephews. Katherine watched her grandchildren play in the yard where her own children had played, where she had taken her first uncertain steps toward healing all those years ago. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from that terrible day on the auction block to a life richer than anything she could have imagined. "You have any regrets?" Gideon asked one evening as they sat together, his arm around her shoulders, watching their grandchildren chase fireflies in the twilight. Katherine considered the question seriously. "I regret what my father did, and I regret the pain I went through. But I cannot regret how it turned out because all of this came from that terrible moment. You, the children, this life. If I could go back and change things, I do not know if I would, knowing what I would lose in the process." "I used to feel guilty about that," Gideon admitted. "About being glad for circumstances that caused you such pain. But I have come to believe that sometimes beauty grows from ashes. That is what you did. You took the worst moment of your life and transformed it into something beautiful." "We transformed it," Katherine corrected, echoing his words from years before. "Together." As the years moved into the 1900s, bringing new technologies and changing times, Katherine and Gideon remained anchored in the rhythms of ranch life. They were in their 50s now, still healthy and active but aware that more years were behind them than ahead. They talked sometimes about mortality, about what they wanted their legacy to be. "I think our legacy is already here," Gideon said, gesturing to the ranch that had grown and prospered under their care, to the schoolhouse that bore a plaque with Katherine's name, to the photographs of children and grandchildren that lined their walls. "We built something good from something terrible. We created a family based on love and respect. What more could anyone ask for?" Katherine agreed. They had lived a good life, a life built on their own terms rather than dictated by the cruelty of others. And if their story had started with the worst kind of betrayal, well, it had transformed into the best kind of love, the kind that endured and deepened and changed both people for the better. On a warm spring day when Katherine was 58, she and Gideon took a ride together on horses they had trained themselves, Luna having lived to a remarkable age before passing peacefully in her sleep. They rode to the place where Gideon had found Katherine all those years ago, the road where everything had changed. "I think about her sometimes," Katherine said, looking at the landscape that had remained largely unchanged despite the decades. That terrified 19-year-old girl who thought her life was over. I wish I could go back and tell her that she would survive, that she would find love and happiness, that the worst moment of her life would lead to the best years. "She would probably not believe you," Gideon said with a gentle smile. "But she would have been wrong." They stood together in the place where their story began, older now but still fundamentally the same people who had met on that fateful day. Gideon took Katherine's hand, and she leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his presence that had been her anchor for nearly 30 years. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing me when I was invisible, for valuing me when I thought I had no value, for loving me through everything." "You were never invisible to me," Gideon replied, his voice thick with emotion. "From that first moment, you were the most vivid thing in my world, and you always will be. You are priceless to me, Katherine. Always." They rode back to the ranch hand in hand, the sunset painting the desert in colors that seemed particularly brilliant that evening. The ranch spread before them, buildings they had maintained and expanded over the years, corrals full of horses, fields they had cultivated. But more than the physical structures, they had built something intangible but infinitely more valuable. A home filled with love, a family built on trust, a legacy of kindness in a sometimes cruel world. Matthew was waiting for them when they arrived, now a man in his 30s with children of his own. "Mother, Father, we have been planning something. The whole family wants to do a photograph together, all of us. Emma arranged for a photographer to come out from Santa Fe next week." Katherine looked at Gideon, seeing her own joy reflected in his eyes. "That sounds perfect." The following week, 3 generations of the Walsh family gathered in front of the main house. Katherine and Gideon sat in chairs at the center, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. The photographer, a young man with modern equipment, arranged them carefully, making sure everyone would be visible in the frame. "Everyone hold still," he instructed, then triggered the flash that captured the moment forever. Katherine knew that photograph would hang in the house for years to come, a testament to everything they had built. When she was gone, and Gideon was gone, their descendants would look at that picture and see a couple who had survived hardship to create something beautiful, who had loved each other through everything life threw at them, who had proven that the worst circumstances could not break people who refused to give up on themselves or each other. That night, after all the family had gone home, Katherine and Gideon sat on their porch one more time, the stars brilliant overhead, the desert night alive with sound and movement. They were tired, but it was the good kind of tired that came from a day well spent. "I would do it all again," Katherine said suddenly. "Every moment, every hardship, every tear. I would do it all again exactly the same because it led me to you, to this life, to everything that matters." Gideon raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "As would I." "You are my greatest adventure, Katherine Walsh. You have been since the moment I met you, and you will be until the day I die." They sat together as they had for thousands of nights before, watching the moon rise over the desert they both loved, surrounded by the life they had built through determination, love, and an unshakable belief in each other's worth. And if their story had started with the words, "My family sold me," it had transformed into something far more powerful, a testament to resilience, redemption, and the transformative power of love freely given. The ranch continued to thrive under the joint management of Katherine, Gideon, and Matthew as the new century brought change to New Mexico territory. In 1912, when New Mexico finally achieved statehood, There was a celebration in Las Lunas that Katherine and Gideon attended with their family. It was strange for Katherine to return to the town where her ordeal had begun, but she walked through those streets now with her head held high, surrounded by her family, proof that she had not just survived but flourished. They were getting older now. There was no denying it. Gideon's hair had gone completely silver, and Katherine's auburn locks had faded to gray. They moved more slowly than they once had, and some mornings it took longer to get their joints working. But they were still sharp in mind and spirit, still active in running the ranch and involved in their grandchildren's lives. When Katherine turned 65, Sarah came home from San Francisco with a surprise. She had written a book about women's rights and legal protections in the Western Territories, and she dedicated it to her mother, who survived injustice and taught me to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Katherine cried when she read the dedication, overwhelmed with pride in her daughter. I never thought what happened to me could lead to something like this, something that might help other women. Everything you went through, everything you survived, it mattered, Sarah said firmly. Your story has power, Mother. It shows that the worst circumstances do not have to define us, that we can choose what we become. As Katherine and Gideon entered their 70s, they began to slow down more noticeably. Matthew took over more of the ranch operations, though they still weighed in on major decisions. They spent more time simply being together, taking slow walks around the property, sitting in the shade during the heat of the day, reminiscing about their years together. We have had a good life, Gideon said one afternoon as they sat together under the cottonwood tree he had planted the year they married. It was now massive, providing deep shade and shelter. The best life, Katherine agreed, better than I ever dreamed possible when I was young. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered again for a celebration. There were children and grandchildren everywhere, along with friends from throughout the territory who had come to honor the couple who had become pillars of their community. Someone made a speech about Gideon and Katherine's contributions to the area, their generosity and kindness, the school Katherine had founded, the horses Gideon had bred that were now sought after throughout the Southwest. But what Katherine remembered most from that day was a quiet moment in the evening when she and Gideon slipped away from the party to walk down to the corrals. They stood watching the horses, descendants of the animals Gideon had trained decades ago, and Katherine thought about how much had changed since that first day she had stood in this exact spot, broken and afraid. I told you then that you were priceless to me, Gideon said, as though reading her thoughts. That has never changed, not for a single moment in all these years. If anything, you have become more precious to me with time. And you to me, Katherine said, leaning into his embrace. You gave me back my life, Gideon. You gave me back myself. I cannot imagine having spent these years with anyone else. They returned to the party hand in hand, their love as strong at 70 as it had been at 25, deepened and enriched by decades of shared experiences, challenges overcome, and joys celebrated together. As they moved into their mid-70s, Katherine and Gideon both remained remarkably healthy despite their age. They credited the active ranch life and the New Mexico sunshine for keeping them vital longer than might otherwise have been expected. They still rode horses, though more sedately than in their youth. They still worked in Katherine's garden, though they now sat on stools to do so. They still talked for hours on the porch every evening, their conversation as engaging as it had been when they first met. The ranch had grown to include not just Matthew's family, but several other families as well, workers who had become extended family over the years. It was a small community unto itself, bound together by mutual respect and shared purpose. Katherine and Gideon took pride in knowing they had created not just a successful business, but a place where people were treated with dignity and fairness. When Katherine turned 78, she suffered a mild stroke that left her temporarily unable to speak. The doctors worried that she might not recover her speech, but Gideon never doubted. He sat with her every day, talking to her even when she could not respond, reading to her, holding her hand. And slowly, gradually, her speech returned, first in single words, then short sentences, and finally full conversations. "I was not ready to be done talking to you," Katherine said when she had recovered enough to express herself clearly. "We have too many years of conversation left. Decades more, if I have anything to say about it," Gideon replied, though they both knew that was probably wishful thinking at their age. They made it through Katherine's 80th birthday, another family celebration that brought all their descendants together. There were great-grandchildren now, toddlers who looked up at Katherine and Gideon with wonder, not quite comprehending how ancient these two old people were or what they represented in the family's history. Emma's son, who was training to be a doctor, examined both Katherine and Gideon during the party and privately told Matthew that they were in remarkable health for their age. "The heart wants what it wants," he said, "and I think both of them want to stay here with each other as long as possible. That kind of will can keep people alive longer than medicine sometimes." On a warm evening in late summer, just after Katherine's 81st birthday, she and Gideon sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The sunset was particularly beautiful, streaking the sky with gold and pink and purple. Katherine leaned against Gideon, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the warmth of his body next to hers. "You ever regret not going east?" she asked suddenly. "To the cities where there was more society, more entertainment?" "Never," Gideon said firmly. "This desert, this ranch, that has been enough, more than enough. It has been everything." "For me too," Katherine said. "I thought I wanted a different life when I was young, before everything happened. I wanted to travel, to see famous places. But I have learned that home is not a location on a map. It is wherever you find love and peace and purpose. And I found all of that here with you." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge one by one in the darkening sky. A coyote called in the distance, and one of the horses whinnied in response. The night air carried the scent of sage and dust and growing things. "I love you," Gideon said softly. "In case I have not mentioned it today." "You mention it every day," Katherine replied with a smile, "and I never get tired of hearing it. I love you too, Gideon Walsh, more than I have words to express." They went to bed that night in the room they had shared for more than 50 years, in the house they had turned into a home, on the land that had become their legacy. They fell asleep in each other's arms as they always did, Gideon's hand resting over Katherine's heart, Katherine's head on Gideon's shoulder. And if the sunrise found them still sleeping, peaceful and content in their final rest, their family chose to believe they had simply moved on to the next adventure together, as they had done everything in life. They were buried side by side under the cottonwood tree, the one Gideon had planted when they married, with a simple stone that read, "Gideon and Katherine Walsh, together in life, together in death." Their love transformed the world, but the true testament to their lives was not in any gravestone. It was in the ranch that continued to prosper under Matthew's care, breeding horses known for their spirit and trainability. It was in the school that still bore Katherine's name, educating children throughout the valley. It was in Sarah's continued work for justice, advocating for those who could not advocate for themselves. It was in Emma's gentle teaching, passing on not just knowledge but the compassion her mother had embodied. Most of all, It was in the family gatherings that continued year after year, bringing together descendants who carried forward the legacy of two people who had refused to let the worst circumstances break them, who had chosen love over bitterness, who had built something beautiful from terrible beginnings. And sometimes, on warm summer evenings, family members swore they could feel a presence on the porch, as though Katherine and Gideon were still there, still watching over the life they had created, still finding joy in each other's company as the sun set over the desert they had both loved. Their story had started with betrayal and pain, with a woman sobbing that her family had sold her. But it had transformed into something far more powerful, a testament that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that two people committed to each other could overcome any obstacle, that worth was not determined by what others were willing to pay, but by the love freely given and received. Katherine Sullivan had been sold for $200 and a horse, but Gideon Walsh had been priceless, always, to the man who had seen her true value from the very beginning and had spent the rest of his life making sure she knew it. And in the end, that made all the difference.